I'm Paul Estabrooks, and today I have a very unusual video to share with you. Nothing to do with family per se, or even history of the family per se, but something that's happened in connection with both. The irony in today's world is that the two men who started revolutions in the 20th century that killed more people than even Hitler are the two men whose bodies are still on display for those who worship them. And that is Mr. Lenin and Mr. Mao. Lenin's body has been on display at his special tomb in Moscow on Red Square for, almost 100 years. It'll be about 97 years ago that he died. And his body was displayed there, and then in 1929, they made a permanent building of beautiful red granite that they built this place for his resting place and his body, and for people to be able to see it. We all know that bodies don't last forever. And so it's quite interesting what's happened with those bodies. I'd always wanted to see Lenin's tomb because every time you went to Moscow, there were lineups that were 3 hours long. Now, I don't like standing in a lineup more than 5 minutes, so obviously I didn't ever go see his body in those circumstances. And people were very respectful, very disciplined. They would be called out if they did anything that would disrespect Mr. Lenin. Now, Lenin himself didn't necessarily create the deaths of so many million people. It was more his successor, Joseph Stalin. But Lenin started the revolution. My point is that two men who started major, both communist revolutions, were responsible for killing more people in the 20th century than anyone else or any other regime. And so Lenin's body has been on display for a long time, and I had never seen it. In 1986, I mentioned in an earlier video in this series that the family we went to Moscow and Leningrad, it was still called then, St. Petersburg, in 1986 on our way home to Canada from Singapore. And the kids were teenagers at this time. They all wanted to see Lenin's body. They saw these lineups, and our tour guide said, sorry, the tomb closes at 1 o'clock every day, and the lineups are about 3 hours long. That's how long the wait is, and that's just with people walking by. They don't let you stop. Once you're inside, you just keep walking through, and you're not allowed to take any photographs. And so but even with people just passing through, the lineups were 3 hours long. So obviously, the kids nor I had a chance to see Lenin's body. In 1980, I did see Mao's body. Mao Zedong died in 1976 in September, and it wasn't long before in that big Tiananmen Square they had built a memorial building to him where his body would be on display. And when I saw the body, it was quite amazing because it had only been 4 years since he had died. They had kept his body in a very cold, refrigerated area below where it lay in state. In this picture, you see the successor, Deng Xiaoping and Hua Guofeng, and other Chinese leaders of the late 70s who are observing the body in the glass sarcophagus there in the Mao Memorial. In 80 and 82, I had a chance to stand in the long lineups and go through and see Mao's body, and it was quite amazing. I mean, it did look like a real body that was beginning to decay, but they were preserving it as best they could. But the real year I want to tell you about is the year of 1992, because in that year I saw both of these bodies. It was in 1992 that I visited China second time with Carl Lawrence. Now, there's an earlier video in this series about Carl and I visiting China in order to research for his book called The Church in China, which won a very special award. Carl was just a terrific writer. And in 1992, he wanted to go back again. And this time, the lineups were not nearly as long. And Carl said, I would like to go in and see Mao Zedong's body. And so we did line up. It wasn't too long. And they kept moving, and we walked in. Now, the outside of the building looks like this. And it's almost, if you understand the framing of the building, it's very much like the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. And when you go inside those first entrance areas, you see this big white marble statue of Mao sitting on a chair, which Carl immediately said, whoa, that looks like Lincoln in the Lincoln Memorial. It has incredible parallelisms there. And then we went inside. It had been 10 years since I had been there before, and I was shocked at how the body had deteriorated in those 10 years. Mao's face was extremely wrinkled, and it was obviously showing its age, even though they had done everything they could to preserve it as well as they could. But it was really showing its age, and it was only 16-year-old body, a dead body. When we came out the back door of Mao's memorial, it was like a different world. There were hawkers out there and souvenir sellers yelling and screaming, selling for people to people. And you said, this is the socialist country that Mao Zedong established? I mean, it was the greatest example of commercialism that you ever saw. And Carl and I decided that we wanted to go where Jim and I had met Auntie Mabel earlier and talked about in an earlier video, the doctor who loved cheeseburgers and chocolate milkshakes. We met her at McDonald's. At this time, there was one large McDonald's that was built right across from the Tiananmen Hotel in 2 blocks away from the square. So Carl and I went there. Do you know that the lineup that day to get into McDonald's was longer than the lineup to see Mao's body? And it was amazing how long we waited just to get a McDonald's hamburger and milkshake. 2 months later, I was leading another tour to the Soviet Union, although it was no longer the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union officially ended at the end of December in 1991. And this was a trip that was focused mostly on the Ukraine. Diane was with me. I think we had about 26 people on this group. And we were going to Ukraine, but first through Moscow. And as we were touring, we asked the tour guide, can we go see Lenin's body in Red Square? Now, again, as you know, it's still there. Every time I was there in previous years talking to a tour guide, they would say, well, it isn't going to be here very long because the reports are that they're going to move the body back to his birthplace and take it out of Red Square. But to this day, they still haven't done that. It's still there. The lineups were pretty long. However, some couple in our tour group wandered off on their own, probably over to the GUM, the G-U-M. It's like the department store. In fact, Americans call it the Macy's of Russia, which is right there on the square. They just lost track of time. So the group has to move on, and we're missing 2 people. So as the tour guide leader, having been there before and having been where they were going before lunch, I said, I'll stay back here and I'll find them and we'll catch up with you. I found out where they were going to be for lunch, and I'll catch up with you at lunchtime with these folk. Well, it wasn't 20 minutes after the bus had left that I found this couple. And now we have all this time on our hands because we got like an hour and a half or more before lunch, where we're to meet up with the group. And I looked over at Lenin's tomb, and it was slightly raining that day, just lightly raining, not heavy, but enough rain that you wanted to have an umbrella. And the lineup was getting very, very small because people didn't want to stand out there in the rain that day. And so we went over and said, well, let's go there. So we lined up. Well, the funniest thing was that because of the rain, people were kibitzing around in this lineup, and there wasn't much respect as there had been in years before as we watched the lineup. And as we watched, the 12 o'clock honor guard comes every day at 12, and their soldiers with their goose step do a kind of an honor tribute to Lenin there at noon in front of his mausoleum. We got to go in, and so for the first time in about 6 trips to the country, I got to see Lenin's dead body. It was also by now in a glass case there, and it was absolutely perfect. Now, the man had been dead 69 years from the building of his mausoleum. He looked like he died yesterday. I mean, it was better than my father when I saw him in the casket for the first time when he passed away. His face was absolutely perfect. And we realized that, hey, after having seen Mao's decay, realized that this wasn't going to be the case with Lenin, that something had been done. It looked like a wax figure that you see at Madame Tussauds. And then we realized the tour guides are never anxious for us to go see this. And we realized that the reason is that this is not really his body anymore. It's just a big lump of wax made into the memorial shape, which you go to see. Now, ironically, later, I was to go back and see Mao's body again much later with another tour group, and it was also perfect. So, since the decay of his body, they've also waxed it or done something to it to make it almost perfect. The situation of that body made me realize why, in 1992, there were longer lineups at McDonald's in Moscow than there was at Lenin's tomb. Later, I traveled in 2007 with Ron Boyd McMillan, and I took his picture here outside of Lenin's tomb. We went again to see it, and of course it was exactly the same, and there was hardly any lineup at all. And I understand that now you can go through there very, very easily if you're interested in seeing them. Well, I share that because how ironic that 2 men who started revolutions that killed more people than anyone else in the 20th century were still being on display, and people were still wanting to go and see them and to pay tribute to them. It's actually amazing. And as I think about that, especially when I was there with Ron, we were talking about, what do these 2 guys, what would they say today if they learned that, for example, in China has one of the fastest growing churches numerically in the world. The church is growing so quickly in Mao's China. And even throughout what was the Soviet Union, there has been a significant growth of church in the Stans and other parts of what was originally the Soviet Union. And I think both of those men, if they had known when they were living that this would happen, they would say, "Over my dead body."